HDB versus resale property. Which property should you buy? Today, I have my guest here, JJ Ong. And maybe some of you are not familiar with him, but I did go on his show to talk about my financial independence, retire early thing. Just let him introduce himself a bit.
Hi, I'm JJ. I used to be very active in the media and entertainment industry. I run a podcast studio, content creation studio. I used to be a lecturer as well. These days, I focus a lot more on my work in real estate, helping people find their dream home and manage their property portfolios.
And just to be clear for the episode, this is not sponsored, so I'm not be plugging any more sponsor. And if you're an early subscriber to the channel, you know that I've done up some BTO content in the past, much less nowadays. Go through some BTO reviews and all that. So I think this episode kind of let me reminisce some good parts of the past because I also want to go through some of my property knowledge. Maybe a bit of background. I have already applied for BTO and right now it's in construction, maybe to be ready by the second half of this year. So that's my current status as a homeowner or an aspiring homeowner. What about you, JJ?
So for me, I'm like you. I waited for my BTO for a while, and right now we are sitting in my BTO, which I've been living here for more than a year, almost 1.5 years already. That is my current home status. Yeah.
And the reason why we want to go through in this video is because I know many of you have anxiety which one to choose for your first property. And last time it seems that BTO is a very clear answer, but ever since like COVID, we have seen a lot of lockdowns and a lot of people need to get a new space for their new family. So today, let's set in discussion, right? Which one should you consider, BTO or resale? And we'll go through in 5 different aspects that you should look at. Firstly, let's start with the eligibility, right? Because if you're not even eligible for either one, we don't have to talk about the rest really. So maybe JJ, let's fill up. What is eligibility for someone to really be able to buy BTO versus resale?
Okay, so essentially for BTOs, right, the first thing is that you must be a Singapore citizen, right? Or rather, HDB calls it, you must be a SE household. That means if you have a partner that's a Singapore citizen and a partner that's a Singapore citizen, you are a SC household. If you're a partner that's Singapore citizen and a partner that is Singapore PR, you have a SC household. And if it's a Singapore PR plus Singapore PR combi, you cannot go for a BTO, right? That's number one. Number two is there is a income ceiling, right? So when it comes to BTOs, because the prices are already subsidized, that means they are usually more affordable than what you can find in the open market. The income ceiling is capped at $14,000 and of course $21,000 for extended family. For example, you and your parents are buying to stay together, that's considered extended family, so that's $21,000. And I think in our country, a lot of people, up and coming, like career-driven people, belong to this category of what I like to call too poor to be rich, too rich to be poor kind of thing, where like you already burst the HDB ceiling to buy BTO, but when you go out into the resale market, you feel like, man, why are prices so high? I think a lot of people are kind of struggling with this, which is why it's like BTO or resale.
I think this brings me back to maybe my group of friends and family, right? My brother-in-law, he's a Singaporean PR, and then his wife is a Singaporean citizen. So they were planning to look at BTOs because the wife recently just converted from PR to Singaporean, right?
Nice.
But they realized that actually this may affect their family planning kind of thing. Because when we are looking at all this BTO versus resale thing, eligibility, like SC and SD is very clear cut. You can plan very early. But if you're a new PR to Singapore, then maybe you want to think of converting to citizen, then move up to the BTO. I think that is a very long wait time that you have to consider. So depending on how your household is made up of, I think eligibility is very important when you're looking at BTO versus resale.
Correct. Yeah, I think at this point, because you're talking about like Singapore PR, being a Singapore PR versus being a Singapore citizen, I think one of the very key points to note is that for resale market, there is a lot less restrictions in terms of the income ceiling and all of that. But when it comes to SPR plus SPR household, that means you have 2 PRs, right? You need to have your PR status for minimum 3 years before you are able to purchase a HDB flat.
Yeah, good point. On the PR to PR, there is also additional things I heard you have to pay for, which is the buyer's stamp duty.
Correct. As of today, right, in mid-February, it is currently at 5%. It is your PR household.
And also just to be clear, can that buyer's stamp duty be recovered when one of the family members become a Singapore citizen?
There are quite a lot of complications when it comes to what they call ABSD refund. So if you were to go into ABSD refund for HDB or private, it's going to be a very long topic. So yeah, maybe we don't really touch on ABSD refund today. Yeah.
Let's move on to the next thing about affordability, right? Because BTO versus resale, after you are eligible, then you need to look at the price. Which one is a better price consideration for your situation? And I think I share a bit about my situation back then in 2019. Back then, I was already working for 4 years in corporate, so I already have a small little amount of savings. Back at the time, resale prices are still not looking very favorable, even before COVID. So I think back then, my savings level plus my wife's capital, I think we could comfortably afford a BTO. But maybe in resale, we need to top up some cash or something like that. So that part comes in when you want to do some family planning. If you want to move to a suitable home, you definitely need to consider your finances. And I don't know what about you, JJ, when you were applying for this BTO.
It's the same thing for me in a sense where I think at that time we were all very young right? I was in my early 20s and I just started like career proper and all that. And BTO is a way of kind of getting us ready to enter the housing market, right? Because even at that time, I think when I started applying, I was like 23 or something like that. I wasn't ready to get married also. So BTO was like, okay, you just try and you see if you get law, right? But the thing about affordability, since now we're talking about affordability, is that at some point, if you are very early on in the game, you're 21 years old, 22 years, 23 years old, I would say if you don't try for the BTO, it's really very wasted,
Yes.
Right? Because BTO is like highly subsidized by the government. Yes, you gotta wait an insanely long period of time and you might not even get it, right? I know people who apply 9 times, 11 times and they never get one, but if you are so early on in the game, you can afford to wait, right? So BTO is like, in my opinion, 100% the answer, right? But when it comes to, say, like at this age range, like you're sort of getting married or married, settling down, you're in your late 20s, early 30s, or sometimes for some of us, even like late 30s, then resale becomes a little bit more of a, wow, should I consider resale, right? Because now there is a little bit of a timeline. Maybe you want to have kids, maybe you have some life goals you want to hit. So like the home ownership becomes extremely important.
Correct.
Right? So I think the consideration is at that age, right? At 28, 29, 35, you can go for a BTO, and if you luckily, it's like by Toto if you really get it, amazing. You're going to definitely enter the market at what people like to say a very good entry price, right? Because subsidized by the government. But if you don't get it, however, right, you're wasting another 1 year, another 2 years, another 3 years. And fortunately or unfortunately, we live in a country where space is extremely limited. Therefore, the inflationary curve for housing, right, as a retail investor, that market goes up, market goes down.
Correct.
Same for housing, but the trajectory is that usually keeps going up, especially in Singapore where space is so scarce, right? It usually goes up. So if you're waiting for your BTO and you apply for 1 year, 2 years, after 6 applications, you're not getting it, then you're kind of forced to come back to the resale market 2 years later with prices that will most likely be higher than the ones you will look at 2 years later.
A lot of times in investing, we talk about opportunity cost. So time is also an opportunity cost. How much time have you spent applying for BTO? All the time could have used for you to maybe got a resale property, even at a slightly higher price, but you have much more space to roam about, create a new family and all that. Yeah, so that is also consideration apart from price that you should think about.
Definitely.
All right, so JJ, we talked about all these resale versus BTO. Can we go through a bit about the grants? Because some people, maybe the first time applying, they don't even know what grants are available for each property.
All right, so essentially, right, one of the key things about buying a public housing property versus private condominium or landed is that the government, or rather HDB, has schemes in place to help us become homeowners, because that is not sponsored by HDB, but that is HDB's goal and all of that, right? So essentially, there are a couple of grants that most first-time homeowners can apply for, because that's what we're focusing on today. So for BTO, it's very straightforward. Because the prices that you see on the website and everything, they're already subsidized, there is only one grant that is applicable, which is the EHG grant, right? Which is dependent on your income.
Yeah, EHG means Enhanced Housing Grant.
Right. So right now, for brand new BTOs, right, it's just EHG, which is dependent on your income. HDB flashes it out very clearly in the table. If you belong to what income group, how much you're making per month, you can get XX amount of grant and vice versa. But when it comes to resale, because I think HDB and the government also know that resale market, right, can be quite tough, especially for, first-time home buyers. You're coming out, you're working for 1 year, 2 years, your CPF is limited. So there are a lot of grants to help support first-time homeowners or, generally people looking for public housing. So EHG grant is also applicable for resale properties, but there are 2 other grants that you can look at when it comes to resale properties. The first one is known as a CPF grant, CPF grant is broken into two subcategories, singles grant or family grant, right? So depending on the housing type and everything, HDB flashes out very clearly on how much you can get depending on your situation.
Okay.
And the other one is known as the proximity housing grant, PHG, which is that I think our country is all about, like nation building and like family and things like that. So if you choose to stay close to your family, specifically 4 km radius within your parents' place, you're entitled to this thing known as a proximity housing grant, depending on if you're a single or if you are buying as a couple. And if you choose to stay with your parents, that means you're buying the house and then you're asking your parents to come and stay with you, then you get a higher proximity housing grant. Yeah, so all these amounts, right, largely depends on your personal situation. So we don't really want to say, generally Singaporeans get how much. The grant amount vary a huge amount depending on your personal situation. Yeah. So HDB flashes out extremely clearly on the website. You can actually check those out.
Yeah, I know that some university students, before they even graduate, they start to strategize really, because maybe sometimes their partner are a bit older than them, then they start in the workforce 12 months earlier. Then they can qualify to apply for the grants, right? While the other half is still studying. So zero income, maximum grants, get the biggest flat they can afford at that point of time, and then boom, they just game the BTO.
Yeah.
So it happens lah. People strategize years ahead, but the most important thing is it the right partner for you first? Because some people, when they apply BTO, they close both eyes. But after they apply, then they realize maybe this partner is not for them.
I think that's the challenging part. That's the rat race, right? Because now we're talking about buying a house. You can get a professional or you do the calculations, you can do the timeline planning and whatever, but something that you cannot plan for, the things about like emotions are feelings and love. We want to get a head start in the housing game, but sometimes we maybe are a bit too rash, right? Especially, BTO will be very long. So I think what Chris mentioned is also very important is the purpose for settling down, right? It cannot be because, my friends say BTO is my first pot of gold, so I gotta go for the BTO, because if that is your sole purpose, right, it's probably gonna cause you a lot of agony down the road.
Can we talk a bit about maybe after the BTO, you're staying for 5 years, and then you're thinking of maybe selling? What are the considerations? Because there's something called Resale Levy, COV,
right?
And also, if you want to apply for the next second BTO after your first BTO, let's talk about it, because I myself is not very familiar with all this stuff.
Okay, let's just get Resale Levy out of the way first, because today we're focusing on first-time buyers. Resale Levy is not applicable to first-time buyers. Essentially, what Resale Levy is, right, is that the government only start to consider Resale Levy when you're purchasing second-time BTO. So a very common situation for Resale Levy is that, you have bought your first house, your BTO, then you upgrade to a 5-room resale flat. And then after that, towards the end of your career retirement, you want to downsize back to a 3-room, and then you want to get a new BTO again. That is when Resale Levy applies. So what is, I think, more applicable is this thing known as cash over valuation, which is COV. So for some of the viewers watching, maybe they have just hit their 5-year MOP or they're hitting their 5-year MOP and they're thinking of selling. COV is a topic that is often talked about by home buyers and home sellers because it's a very crucial matter of consideration when you're buying a HDB flat in Singapore. Yeah, so to put it simply, COV is the amount of money that you need to pay for the house in cash that is above the valuation. Therefore, COV stands for cash over valuation. So every time you sell a flat, right, you have to apply for valuation and the HDB valuer will come down, they'll do some inspection and they will slap a value on their house. To put it into numbers, so for example, you say, I want to sell my flat at $1 million. A very good location, 4-room flat, I want to sell $1 million. HDB valuer come down, HDB valuer say, I think this flat only worth 950K. So the buyer who has offered you $1 million will have to pay extra $50,000 to get this flat, to exercise this flat. Therefore, he will be paying $50,000 COV. And COV cannot be paid with anything else other than cash. Must be cash.
So that is really something that maybe even you as a first-time home buyer, you will never consider, like myself back then. So good food for thought. I think next let's talk about maybe a bit of the waiting time. I know we covered earlier because some people, they can only accept very short waiting time because maybe the wife is already expecting a baby already. Maybe for you, already a homeowner, what are your thoughts about BTO waiting time versus resale waiting time? How fast can you expect to get your flat?
For me personally, right, I'm quite lucky because I belong to the sale of balance batch. So I only waited about 2 years, whereas the rest of the people living in my estate, they probably waited, I think, almost 6 years because of the COVID delay.
That reminds me, mine was expected 4 years completion. And then COVID delay add 1 more year, become 5 years.
Correct.
So this kind of unforeseen things really can happen when you are waiting for a BTO.
Correct. Yeah, as time passes, there's too many unpredictable things. Sometimes we might be lucky, we might get the flat faster. Sometimes like COVID happens, we might get the flat a bit later. But when it comes to waiting times, right, it's really a matter of why you need that flat. If let's say you have a baby coming, I don't think it might be a really good idea to go and try for SBF or try for BTO, because you gotta do your confinement, you gotta make sure that you bring your baby up in a great environment, and sometimes maybe your current environment might not be too ideal, might be too cramped. So it really depends on the purpose lah, like why you need the flat, right? If you really can wait, then 5 years, like no problem. But I think one of the things that I also want to allow people to take note now is that when it comes to resale flat, I think a lot of Singaporeans who are first-time homeowners always have the misconception that BTO very long, resale flat very fast. So the question is, how fast is fast? I know the flat is already ready, it's already built, but it's not you go and buy, right? Then the next week you can move in. There's still a lot of paperwork to be done, negotiation to be done. So when it comes to purchasing a resale flat, it's definitely faster than a BTO, but it can stretch all the way until 1 year or beyond also. So why is that so? It's because when it comes to a resale flat, it's a negotiation between the seller and the buyer. There are things like what is known as the 3-month extension period, which is essentially a 3 months extension after the completion of the sale, where the seller still needs to stay there because the seller needs to also buy a new place to move to, need to renovate the place. And then there's this other period that also might drag out the completion, is known as the submission period, right? Maximum 60 days before you submit the case to HDB. This period, right, is usually actually agreed upon between the seller and buyer, so that the seller can use that period of time to go and search for their new house, to go and negotiate for their new house and all that lah. So all these things, right, these trinkets of 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 60 days, 3 months, right? They can add up.
Hello.
Sometimes maybe we are a bit picky. We are picky about the direction of the house, the view. Then we take maybe a bit longer to look for the house. So all these things add up, right? Sometimes it can take over a year for a resale flat.
Over a year is much longer than I expected.
Yeah, quite long lah. It really depends on, if you're the type of person that, a home is a home. I live my life, and a home is a place for me to get back to. As long as it's not too terrible, I'm happy with, most average unit, right? Then, okay, like the negotiations will usually be a lot smoother and everything. But if you are a little bit more particular, like, I have to stay above the 10th floor, and I'm feng shui master say XXX, like the window must face, then it becomes a little more challenging, because the time taken for you to search could be potentially longer, and the time taken for you to negotiate with the seller on prices, the timeline also could be longer. So I would say the timeline is extremely important for resale. So it's very important to sit down with someone that you can trust, whether a professional or someone who has experience, right, to make sure the timeline works for you.
Yeah, I think a lot of people really underestimated how long resale transactions could take. Like my impression of resale property, 3 to 6 months easily. Then now that I hear what you say, actually it makes sense, because all this paperwork and even the extension period, because really after the seller sell the home to you, maybe need to find another place. These are really very realistic. And it happened to my brother-in-law. So it got delayed by, I think, 1 or 2 months compared to the original stated date. Yeah, so things happen. A lot of things that you did not expect it to happen. It may just impact how fast you expect to stay in your new home. Maybe I want to touch on one more thing about family aspect. Assuming you as a couple, you are married, then you all need to think of where you want to stay together. Is it in the husband's place or the wife's place? Then all these family matters also come into consideration, that because sometimes you stay at one place, the other side not happy. Then sometimes the family dynamics kind of change. And if your family and all these are very good social ties, then good, you all can wait out for the BTO. But comes the next question, how long can you tahan in the same flat as the other side of the family? That is something that people rarely talk about.
Because it's not about whether, like this person is good or bad. Sometimes like your upbringing culture is just very different. And when you see each other over the weekend for meals versus you stay together, you see each other every day, it's very different now. I'm sure you know, because Chris, you're staying at your parents-in-law's place right now, right? So thankfully, you're a nice guy. Your parents-in-law are also nice people. So it kind of works out.
Yeah.
But not everybody has that privilege.
Yeah, so think about it. Sometimes it's not just about financial. It's also about social, emotional, all these things.
I think one thing that maybe we missed out just now when we talked about MOP is that I keep talking about 5 years MOP. But I think so last year, right, MOP varies already. So if you're a new batch that are applying for the newer BTOs, right, now there is a standard plus and prime scheme. For plus and prime, the MOP is actually 10 years instead of 5 years. And for plus and prime, right, after you sell, so we're very lucky. When we sell, right, the government not going to take back any money from us. But for the newer batch of people, when you are buying for the 10-year MOP plus and prime flats, right, the government will actually claw back a certain amount of money from your profits when you sell your house 10 years later.
And when is that effective for the plus and prime scheme?
It's already in effect. Yeah, correct. It's already in effect. So like for those of you that are thinking of applying for BTOs this year, that is something that you definitely have to look out for.
I think let's go on to the most important aspect of property, which is location. Because you know what they always say, right? Location, location, location. Even though I do have some reservation on that. But I think when we are looking at property, especially BTO versus resale, in BTO, we are kind of limited to what HDB comes up with the sites. Then resale is more like free for all. But sometimes location is not the only thing that we should talk about lah. But I know a lot of people really care about location. You all want like near MRT, near shopping mall, near good school, high floor, all these things. But you all cannot have your cake at 821 lah. I can tell you honestly, if everything's so perfect, it will be like sky high price, like the Pinnacle at Duxton, you all should know. And other $1 million flats. We've seen so many transactions in the past few years. All these things have very good aspects of location and all that stuff. Maybe JJ, you share a bit about your thoughts on when you're looking at this BTO versus resale, the location. What should you consider?
I think when it comes to location, okay, so let's get BTO out of the way first. So when it comes to location, the key thing to note is that the better the location, so in prime and choice locations, you're looking at a 10-year MOP most of the time, and you're looking at a percentage clawback by the government. But BTO is a bit less in our control. But when it comes to resale, right, you literally can buy almost anything that you want depending on your eligibility. So I think when it comes to location, resale is more, people who are looking to buy resale has to think about it a bit more, right? In my opinion, location is important as one of the factors to consider for this thing known as an exit strategy. Because for most of us, right, we hope to progress in life. Maybe we hope to buy a bigger place, upgrade from a 3-room to a 5-room, maybe upgrade from a HDB to a condo in the future. So when we eventually want to sell, whether it's 5 years later, 10 years later, we have to think about the sellability, which is why a lot of professionals keep telling you location is the key, location is the key. Location is one of the things to look at, but there are many factors lah. So my opinion when it comes to location, right, is that now we're not talking pure numbers. We're not talking about buying a mutual fund or an ETF where we analyze the trajectory of the market and we look at, you know, the general economy and things like that. We're talking about a product that you're buying, that you're going to stay in. There's a lot of non-quantifiable aspects like comfort and proximity to parents and things like that that you cannot really factor in terms of pure numbers one, because these are qualitative. Yeah, so I would say buy the location that you're most comfortable with. Maybe somewhere far out to the outreaches corners of Singapore that is not near the MRT, it's not the ideal location, but your parents stay there. You need that 20k proximity grant or something like that, then that is the location you go for. Well, it depends on your situation, right? No, not advice here, but sometimes you don't want to sacrifice living close to your parents because there are certain benefits to doing that apart from the grant.
Right. So my thoughts about location is because when I applied for my first BTO ballot, right, I also chose a mature location, right, a mature project. And then back at the time, I did not have a very clear idea of how much I should afford. When I got the queue number and then I look at the document, then at my budget back at the time, I can only afford the 4th level for a mature estate. So then I think about it. If I want to afford a smaller flat in a mature area versus a larger flat in a non-mature estate, and the price difference is quite huge. So I weigh my cost and benefits up. Do I want a larger space or do I want a smaller space in the nicer area? And the non-mature estate is also near an MRT. It's just that because it's a non-mature estate, so I think back then there were grants for non-mature estate, but no grants for mature estate. So I picked the latter lah. Because my thought process was that if you want it close to your workplace can change over time. And indeed it changed because after COVID, many of us work from home already. So the location near to the office area, the CBD area, is not as big as before. It's still important, but not as big as before. So all these, your life circumstances will change. Right? You may not feel it right now, but as you progress on further in life, then you realize that maybe the location that you once thought was the perfect location may change because of your lifestyle and your circumstances that you may face. So this is something that you have to consider if you're a first-time home buyer.
Correct. And I think location is not it's like a buddy meal. And location, right, always comes with this thing that I like to call the attributes of the unit. So maybe you want to buy a unit that is super close to the MRT. You can walk to, like wherever you want to go, kind of thing. but is second floor unit, face rubbish chute, west sun, the neighbors are, not that great, versus a unit that is super far out, level 20, no west sun, north-south facing, neighbors are great, far apart from each other, not facing the lift. And then this becomes a point of consideration already, because it's the quality of life that you want to live and also the exit strategy when you want to sell versus the actual postal code.
Actual postal code.
Yeah.
I like the way you put it, because a lot of people like to apply in the core region of BTO.
Right.
And then now government come with this Standard Plus and Prime to really spread out the people outside of the central region, which is why the longer MOP is to let people stay there, not to profit from this whole BTO thing, to game the BTO exercise, which I am in favor of. Yeah, I really think we all should spread out across Singapore, build our own hubs. I know Tampines have one, then Jurong East has one, then Punggol has one, then maybe somewhere in the north has one, Woodlands or something. So yeah, I think this time we've gone through quite a few basic considerations. Because if we are going further deeper, I think it's much more advanced really.
Yeah.
That you should think of exit strategy and all these things. You need to think further long term. This is more for basic. If you really have zero knowledge on how to prepare to buy for your first property, then this BTO versus resale consideration is for you. If you want to talk about HDB versus condo, all these are much more advanced. So if you forget whatever we have said in this long video, right? If there's only one thing that you need to think about is that what is your purpose of buying this flat, right? Whether it's a BTO or the resale. Because everyone talks about the what, talk about the how. Nobody talks about why, right? The why is always the reason that you should purchase. Whether you want to go for BTO, whether you want to go for resale, that's your own personal decision. You may have your own personal life situations that others may not be able to comprehend. Your colleagues may not comprehend, your parents, even your friends, they will not understand your personal situation. So sit down with your partner. If you are going as a couple scheme, then talk about it and make the best financial decision for yourself.
All right. Yeah. I mean, to put it into context, into what a lot of what Chris talks about, right? It's not about what you invest in, right? It's about why you're investing. Because if you don't understand the purpose in which you're investing in VOO, QQQM or whatever, when the market crashes, right, you're going to panic sell for sure, right? Like many of, the people that we know. But if you know the purpose on why you're investing, the conviction is strong, you have done your research, and then you ride through the ups and downs of the market, 10, 20 years later, you're going to come out on top.
I kind of like how this links back to personal investments, because it is exactly why I kind of pivot to passive investing. But that's a topic for another day, right? But if you really enjoy our conversation and you really like it, right, please click the like button. Because if it's good enough, we will do a follow-up episode on this. Today, really very basic. We haven't even go to the deeper part. And if you really want a good property kind of discussion, then you can look for JJ, who is a licensed real estate agent, and then he will help you out with all the queries and maybe help you with all the questions that you may have on property, whether resale, HDB, BTO, or private. Alright, so stay tuned to our next episode on property discussion and hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you.